Also, we're always looking for ideas for topics. So if there are electronic records topics that interest you, things you'd like to see trainings about, webinars on, let us know in the chat box. All right, I think we have a very full webinar today. So let's get started. Welcome. My name is Catherine Berenger. I'm Director of Appraisal and Description at the Maryland State Archives, and I'm also the co-chair of the COSA SERI Education and Programming Subcommittee. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which focuses on using story maps as a tool for engagement and advocacy. This webinar is part of our SERI webinar series. Please stay tuned for upcoming titles. Right now, we're working on a webinar that addresses legal holds and digital records. I'd also like to call your attention to some of our online educational resources. A great source for information is the Resource Center on the COSA website, which has a wide variety of assets, from policy examples, information on tools, and links to sites and blogs. For example, I was on it today and I found a link to a Duke University blog post that explains how you can create an interactive map for a collection in 30 minutes or less. COSA also has a YouTube channel where we make recordings of webinars available. We're going to include on there a recording of today's webinar. We also have on that channel a number of educational video on records topics. Well, let's get back to today's topics. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Brett Fuller is a public historian from Austin, Texas. They fell in love with the Pacific Northwest while visiting as a teenager and now serve as the Oregon State Archives Public Affairs Specialist in Salem, Oregon. Lori Ashley is an independent consultant who has provided records management advice to more than 100 private and public sector organizations over the past 20 years. She has collaborated with COSA since 2011, most notably on research projects and the Digital Preservation Capability Self-Assessment Surveys. Lori served as Preservica's Industry Market Development Manager for 4 years, where she analyzed requirements to define digital preservation use cases and inform the company's marketing efforts and product roadmap. Lori was adjunct instructor for graduate courses in records management for the University of Wisconsin iSchool and the Master of Archival Studies program at Clayton State University in Georgia. Lori is a member of SAA, AIIM, and ARMA, and an occasional speaker at industry conferences and chapter seminars. Elizabeth Perks has worked for the Utah State Archives for 32 years. She is the electronic records archivist and works with electronic records coming into the archive's holdings. Elizabeth also manages the Axiom database as well as website harvesting through Archivit. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Brett Fuller.
Hi, y'all. My name is Brett Fuller. I am the Public Affairs Specialist here at the Oregon State Archives, and this is my presentation on audience and equity through StoryMaps, using them as an outreach tool. So I want to open things up. Slide, please, actually. Wonderful. I'm getting a hold of y'all from Salem, Oregon, and this is a shot of our capital here in about a month or so, when the cherry blossoms come into their full kind of bright vigor. Do I have a time, by the way, on this this meeting? Is this a 10-minute presentation? Is this a 15-minute presentation?
The entire presentation is an hour.
Wonderful. Okay, cool.
But leave some time for your other two speakers.
For sure. Thank you for that time check. Great. Then let's go ahead. Let's start. Slide, please. Okay, great. So I'm going to tell y'all about what StoryMaps and or what I have done with outreach in StoryMaps. They're a really unique tool, and they're brand new in a way, and so we're all kind of finding ways to use them. And you kind of have to like turn the knobs and twist the levers a little bit on it, and to really figure out what it is that they can do. But I've really brought forward 4 main points here for y'all. Where's my hand? There's my hand. 4 main points here for y'all. That they really have this capacity to reach larger audiences than what your organization may have originally kind of planned for itself, especially looking at things like print media and social media and things like that, which are in their own way limited. So a story map is capable of like getting to equity goals by increasing access and accessibility to information, and to be able to repeatedly bring forward pieces of information so that people can engage with it in ways that are better suited to their particular learning styles, their modes of thinking. So they're in a way, they are a kind of untested field for organizations, and especially organizations that deal with physical space, can start to increase access to that physical space to whoever their constituents are. In my case, I work for the state of Oregon, so my constituency are the people of Oregon. Slide, please, actually. So to do that today, I'm going to be drawing from a series of parts of one of the story maps that I've done recently here with the state archives that focuses on the state parks. We recently had a centennial of the state parks just last year, and we made a story map about it to help kind of bring forward some information about the parks, increase interest and activity in said parks, and also to kind of rep our neighboring institution across the way at the Parks Department. And we're going to do it in a physical gallery space that we have set up in the front of our building, but about halfway through our creation of the exhibit, we came to the conclusion that, well, we were still kind of shuttered for COVID, and also we would actually be able to access more people, a larger chunk of our constituency, if we did the thing entirely online. This is a change for us, as we had previously done physical exhibits and then turned them into online exhibits that, yet again, were done to increase access and equity. But doing it this way for an entirely online format was a new step for us, and something that we decided that we were going to use story maps to help push forward, given the geographic-based nature of the exhibit. Slide, please. So one of the things that I've really noticed about story maps is that they have the capacity to connect people to places that they might not be. And this is especially important for me here in Oregon, which is a really, really big area with a very concentrated population in one part. I brought up this map of Oregon's population density in 2018 to prove this point, or to show this point, excuse me. So about half of the population lives in that big dark glorp up there on the upper left around Multnomah County, right? And the fully 3/4 of it live in between Multnomah County and Lane County, part of the way down, which means that most of the Oregonians that we access, that are involved with us, are really only living and experiencing a small chunk of the state. And so if I'm going to really exhibit some of the exciting and interesting parts of Oregon, I need to find a way to maybe get a hold of people who don't go out there, or potentially even can't go out there. It's rugged. It's definitely a full-on like Western state without a lot of infrastructure or support out there in the hinterland. Slide, please. I've got a good picture of it coming up. So out there in the far east, is a section of Oregon that is gorgeous and full of really interesting geography and life and prehistory and American Indian history as well. And it's a fantastically gorgeous place that not everyone can get to. And so one of the things that I wanted to do in this story map was to exhibit some of these spots, of which this is just one example, honestly. And when you're talking about space, like I'm just talking about within a single state, but like we have the capacity with story maps to connect people to places that they would have no chance of getting to. Anyone with an internet connection can learn about really anywhere in the world using a story map, and I think that is an important quality to consider in terms of access and equity. And outreach too, like there are people that live out here in Eastern Oregon, and their stories are often untold, or at least unfocused on by the vast majority of the state, and especially the Portland metro area. So this is an important way for us to kind of bridge the gap between people and locations. To my next point, slide, please. One other really cool thing about story maps is that they are kind of multimodal systems, right? It's a combination of text and images, sure, and maps, and you can touch it and scroll through it and embed almost anything into it. And I think that it's really cool because everyone learns differently, and everyone's going to take away something from something a little bit different. So one of the things that we can do with our story maps is we can engage people who might not focus on words, or may instead really be able to like move a map around and look at things and get their hands on stuff. You can embed a video where a person can do a lot of talking. We're working on one right now on the national monuments that are in Oregon, and we're going to have a number of interviews in them with park rangers and other such folks, so that you can hear in people's own words what is so special about these places. And I think that's a really important quality of story maps that we don't really get a lot of the time in many online exhibits, and that we can have a hard time with in physical exhibit spaces. I'm a public historian, and I'm a specialist in museums and museum studies and creating exhibits and engaging learners that don't really learn by reading, or who may even have learning difficulties with reading, is something that is a big deal in the museum community, and it's something that we can transfer. If it's something that we can take out into, the digital world, and we can increase access that way, boom, we've got greater steps towards equity, which I think is really important and really useful about these story map systems. Slide, please. And so this also helps us for organizations that have points that they want to repeat and time again, beats they want to hit, For instance, I've brought this up. This is the land acknowledgement that was put together by the Legislative Commission on Indian Services here in Oregon. So in talking about the land and talking about specifically the land in Oregon, or the land that is now called Oregon, it was important for us and our organization to continuously state in more than just one way that this land was occupied before it was Oregon, that it's part of a long tradition that stretches back to time immemorial, for many, many people. who have had ancestors in this land. And so that was something that I wanted to hit, a bell that I wanted to ring many, many times in the story map. And slide, please. And there's a lot of ways that you can do it as well. I did it here in this bit on the Klamath Mountains, not only covering how the Klamath tribal territory was chopped up and divided and given to settlers, and yet again linking out to a different site, a different organization, and not only that, but also considering environmental change and hammering in the consequences of climate change too. The state of Oregon is a gorgeous, wilderness in many places, but it's also dramatically altered from the original ecosystem that was here, not but 200-300 years ago. And these are bells that I also needed to hit in this exhibit. And so being able to have a person scroll through these things and for them to find in multiple places and multiple ways that many of the important notes that not just like me as a designer and a creator, but my organization with the Oregon State Archives and the Secretary of State's office in general in Oregon has to communicate constantly with the 9 other nations that exist within the borders of the state, and we need to make that relationship an important part of everything that we do, and we can use story maps for that too, which yet again is something I think is very, very cool. And then to my final point, can I slide please again? I also think that story maps are really cool because you don't need to have everything there at once. You don't need to overwhelm people with information. You can instead kind of link into different spots. You can allow a person to follow the rabbit hole or not rabbit trails that they're interested in. Yet again, this is part of engaging different learners and increasing access to information. What I can do is I can put links in places. I can generate interest. I can let people know that there are things that they can think about and places and people that they can talk to that they may not have known about before. So using a story map not just as a means of just like straight conveying information, but using a story map as a means of connecting people to other people who can teach them even more, I think is one of their most useful tools. And being able to do that in multiple different ways. For instance, in this 100 Years of Oregon State Parks story map exhibit that I've put up, we have links to the Oregon Encyclopedia, we have links to Oregon Public Broadcasting, we have links to other government agencies that deal with and around the Department of Parks and Recreation. We link to the main side of the Parks and Recreation Department time and again, because they're so useful and they have important stories to tell. It really helps you to keep from operating inside of a vacuum. And it really helps to do away with one of the issues of curation, which is that when a person goes to a curated event or a curated space, it's very easy for them to conclude that the information presented is the totality of information available, which is simply not true. There's only so much that I can fit in a given space, and inside of a physical gallery space, it's way easier for that kind of like closed mindset to come to the fore. But inside of an open, linkable space like this, it's larger. There's a bigger web work of information out there and available that you can see and that you can access. And when it comes down to it, time and again, equity is about access. Equity is about giving us all the capacity to by all of our the different places that we come from to get to the same spot. And that, I think, is something that is very, very important and very, very useful about these programs. So I guess in conclusion, in totality, these things, this program, this weird, GIS thing, is strangely a means of connecting people to places and connecting people to other people and connecting information to the people that need it in ways that they can best access it. So it's a more powerful tool, I think, than I had originally given it credit for. And I'm very interested to see how I use it in the future and what changes happen to it in the future. So slide, please. Oh, that's right. I had two more slides that I'd forgotten about. There's this one. This covers some of the OPB stuff. This is some of the bits about some radio bits and some video and things like that. Okay, now final slide, please. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. And I'm really happy to have presented this information. Please ask me some questions in the chat if you'd like. I don't know if we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of it, but we should have plenty of time for our future speakers. So yet again, thank y'all.
Okay, I guess I'm up. This is Lori Ashley, and I'm going to do something a little bit different than what Brett did, and that was really interesting. Thank you, Brett. I'm going to talk about an approach that I learned a while ago in a particular job. I'll explain why. So this is a sort of a learning, an adult learning exercise and approach. So go ahead and next slide, please. So this is what I hope to do, is to share this business strategy adult learning technique that I have seen work, but I'm focusing specifically on transformational change that's happening in government. So trying to create among our peers an idea of what this electronic record keeping stuff is all about and how to get the resources and plans and standards and other things in place to take care of digital public records. So hopefully you'll find it a little bit inspiring. It will go kind of fast, and I welcome you to contact me afterwards if you'd like an explanation. I did create a handout too, and I'm happy to send that to anybody who might have an interest. Next slide. So this is where I'm coming from, and it's not just because I read this in one of the COSA publications, is that there's a lack of suitable repositories for electronic records in state, local, territorial government. And I've seen it over and over again. And this doesn't exclude private archives, of course, because it's an issue that's everywhere. But I'm focused on what do public sector archives and records management practitioners need. And I believe that explaining what's required for digital preservation, getting people engaged and understanding how it connects to their work is a change management exercise. And that once you can get people to see that there's something going on here, something that needs to be done, people bring their own experience and expertise, motivation, commitment to public service to the process. And that's what we need, because there aren't enough records managers and archivists in public sector to make it all happen on their own. So we really need the people who are creating and managing the records. Next slide, please. So this is new, not new to any of you. These are the common things that I've seen over my years of association with COSA and my consulting practice, and then the years that I had with Preservica, which of course they're in the business of selling software for digital preservation. But there's, the agencies want to transfer their electronic records. They may not know how to do it. They may not have the resources to do it. It requires changes in standards and new technologies and a lot of things that have to go into getting the records from where they're created to where they're going to be managed over time. And this means both in agencies and in archives, because of course there's a lot of long-term agency records that will never come to the archives. They're not intended to. But they still have the same requirements for being managed and taken care of and protected over time. Next slide, please. So when I was in the regulated utility industry, I was part of an exercise which brought people physically together across the company in a learning map experience. And what you see here are some examples from a company, Root Learning, that prepares these. And It's a literacy exercise. It embeds a strategy of an organization with external factors, internal factors. What was happening in the utility industry when I was a part of this was deregulation. And so if you're going from a 100 or 150-year monopoly for gas and electric service to competition, it's a pretty upsetting thing. And so my experience was the company investing in building maps, bringing people together in small group roundtable exercises, having a longtime engineer from the electric side sit next to a brand new employee who might be working in the field, and people bringing their own experiences to this common learning map experience, walk away with a, oh, I get it. This is where the company is going. This is how I'm connected to that work. This is what I need to do. So that's basically what I'm advocating here. Next slide. But what I'm applying it to is digital transformation in government. Digital transformation is happening everywhere, of course, but in government, it's, sometimes government doesn't move very quickly. It moves very systematically and methodically, but not necessarily quickly. And unfortunately, digital stuff moves very rapidly. So, in my practice, I've seen we need to have public sector places where records are taken care of. And I'm using this notion of transformation, which everybody's experiencing in their personal and professional lives, to drive home the need for something's got to change. Next slide, please. And these are just a couple of examples of where government, US government or government in general has says, yes, we've got to change the way we do business. People have expectations about digital delivery of services. The pandemic showed us that we've got to connect people to public records in ways which are different from showing up at a public office. And so this is something I think that's very real, very visceral. People understand this, and I'm using it to try to drive awareness and advocacy and the good stuff to happen for public sector records and archives. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the rationale. So what if people better understood the big picture of electronic record keeping, their place within it, and a common understanding of what was going on around us and what was driving the need for public sector folks to make changes and to participate, right, in moving it forward. Go ahead and click again, Becky. There's another thing that comes up. So basically, if you have a story map, much to the points that Brett made, if you tell me, I might forget. If you show me, I may remember. If you involve me, then I'm going to understand it because I've absorbed it and taken it in a way which is different from just, seeing something go across the screen. Next slide, please. So what this does is it brings people from their experience into a common walkthrough of a map, if you will. And what they do is they connect their experience and their work to what's going on. And together, the whole group sort of moves ahead in understanding how can we do our job differently? How can we somehow make this digital record keeping stuff a little less complex, more real? How do we systematically move from where we are to a better place to be able to continue to deliver services to our constituents? Next slide. So this was my aim, was at the end of it to get people to understand that digital repositories have certain characteristics. We need lots of them. They're technology, but they're also people and process. We have to change our standards. We need money to support them. We need changes in laws. And so that's my end game. And you'll see this on this example map that I have in just a second. Next slide. And so here's methodology. Next slide. So it starts with a base map. There's some common features. It can be, of course, real, as in the case of Brett and our co-presenter, Elizabeth. It can be made up, which is what I did for this one. You use cartographic features, which are people understand maps and direction, things like that. You create a sense of momentum so that people understand there's something to do. And everybody just kind of gets into it. It's kind of fun. Next slide. So in the maps that I've learned, there's always water, there's wind forces, and there's water. And the river that you'll see through my map is something that's always changing and moving. It's a life force. It's navigable. You can't control it, but you can navigate it. And then there's places next to the moving water where people can rest or organize, prepare, strategize, things like that. So let me show you, next slide, what my map looks like. Here it is. So what I'm going to do quickly is to run through the features on here so you can see. So let me just point out while you're looking at it, there's a tree on the left and a building that represents the archives. There's kind of a backlog lake up there, some wind blowing. The rocks represent, that there's force, that the dam is busting, right? So then you see the current of the water, which is the digital transformation. There's rafts with people in it. Those are the ones that are going to, help make change and get us to the other side. You'll see my trusted digital repository up at the top on the right, and there's a bridge there. Down at the bottom, you see some flags and then some boards on the map, and I'll just walk you through what those are. So this is a representation. A company like Root Learning comes in and spends lots of time and makes prettier pictures, but I think this will get the point across. So, and the handout that I have has this picture on it and a little explanation. So if you'd like it afterwards, happy to share that. Next slide, please. So you start with the overall visual. People can see that there's something changing and what you do, and why I think the archives have you have such amazing artifacts and materials, visual, physical, whatever, that you can relate to the history of where you've come from. And it helps drive people to say, yeah, we did it then. We captured records then. We made our way. We did what we were supposed to do back then. How are we going to do what we're supposed to do in government in this new environment where things are all churned up and there's always a constant change? So you use the visual metaphor, and there's, in the ones that I've done, there's cards people read, there's statistics and other pieces of data, so that people are looking at facts. And then it's facilitated by someone who's not giving you any answers, but is facilitating the conversation along. So now let me just walk you through the parts here. Next slide. So the winds of change is always a part of it. It's part of the discussion of what's driving the need for us to look anew at how we deliver services to our constituencies. And these are just some of the examples. Of course, the pandemic brought this hybrid work model. In government, there's lots of disinformation and misinformation campaigns, cloud technology. Lots of folks are deploying M365, which changes the way we work. So basically, you talk about what's going on in your jurisdiction that's bringing about these changes. And these are all things that are outside of government, and they're happening to everyone. And so then it's like, okay, got it. It's moving us forward. What are we going to do about it? Next slide, please. So over in the left-hand side of the map, usually it starts from one, there's movement. You start in one corner and go to another one. The tree represents the three branches of government. The little building is the archive. And so it gives you a chance to talk about who are we? What are we all about? How long have we been a government? What are the characteristics of who we are? Talking about the context for record keeping, the flow of information. So what that lake is up there with the canoe is this backlog, which I know many of you in state government are dealing with, of electronic records that haven't come from agencies because they don't know how to transfer them, or maybe you're not ready on the archive side, or you have a lot of things sitting on shelves or disks or on hard drives or shared drives or somewhere that maybe haven't been fully processed and made available through your digital archive, digital system. So it's sort of a backlog, but the situation is that there's a break in the flow, right? We've got to get the flow from agencies to archives happening fluidly and seamlessly and transparently, and keep up with the volume. So my idea is that archives and records managers can leverage the stories about where records came from and what they're used for to get people thinking about, there's churn, now what are we going to do about it? So shared history is a part of this. Next slide. Foundation. So once you see those billboards, and these are some of the things that talk about, you can see the score from one of the digital preservation self-assessments. You can see the NARA deadlines of no more accepting paper records, COSA reports. So there's data and statistics which say this is what's really going on here. This is our backlog, this is our volume, this is our increase. These are things which are factual and get people thinking and talking and connecting to we're moving forward. Next slide. The rapids are, what are we going to do about it, right? So there's people in the rapids, there's tools, you might have, vendors standing off to the side, but in the rafts are the roles, the personas, the people that need to be involved in helping to navigate this digital transformation and keep the government information and records flowing. And then along the bottom, you saw some flags. Those can be used for principles and values of, we want to be flexible, we want to keep costs down, whatever those things are, they're kind of markers along the journey that have to be taken into consideration. Next slide. This is what I think, ideally can come out of it. I see it as a business planning opportunity, a way to say, this is a reality, let's plan together, let's strategize, let's plan for the future, what resources we need. I think that it can get people talking about resources, which are people and budgets, and also skills and capabilities, the expertise that may or may not be residing in an agency or in the archives. You obviously need technology. You can't maintain digital records without electronic technology, and there's a lot that goes to that. Practices, policies, the standards, the guidelines that the archives and records management units put out to say this is what you should be doing, this is what you need to be careful of, this is how we want you to digitize. And then collection management, how do we get that flow that's unbroken from upstream to where the records are produced down to those who are going to take care of them in long-term record storage or archival storage. And how do we deal with legacy? So I see this as an opportunity for people to see the problem, be part of the solution, connect their work and their expertise and their commitment to their own agency and the folks that they serve to the greater good of this life cycle of electronic content and information. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for coming with me on Navigating the Rapids. Happy to share this in my contact information and would love to hear from any of you with some feedback. So thank you.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Perks from Utah. I'll be going over our story map that we created. And I advance the slide.
If you hover the mouse over the slide deck, it'll bring up the advanced arrows, or click on the slide and it should activate that screen.
It is not doing that.
Okay, you want to try again?
It's still not letting me do that.
Down in the bottom left corner there, it's kind of hidden, but I think, yep, right down. That'll be backwards. Just, yep, back over to the left a little bit, right there.
There we are. Okay. Thank you for your help. All right. In Utah, we found that we had a little bit of a problem in that we have court records that are popular among researchers, but they're a little bit mysterious to access because they are managed by court district, and court districts have changed their location over the years. And for researchers, if they're trying to research records in a particular jurisdiction, they need to understand which court district covers that jurisdiction at a particular moment in time. And it's become a little bit confusing for people. So we needed to do something to create some kind of research guide that would be more visual. And now I can't see the slide buttons anymore. Thank you. It's not my next slide. There we are. Wait a minute. This is going backwards. I'm sorry. Okay. We had an old chart that was showing court district numbers and the counties that they were associated with and the years spans, but it's a little bit difficult to navigate that. So we tried different solutions. The best solution would be to create a live map interface where clicking tells you how to find records for that time and place. And we got a proof of concept working for a little while, but it was just in a test environment, and it's a little bit expensive to put it in a live environment, so we don't have the budget for that at the moment. So we started thinking of other ideas, and just creating the geospatial boundaries for use in a map we thought would be a good idea. Okay, so county boundaries, fortunately, have already been published for all of the historical changes that have been made. And this happens to be available at the Newberry website, which I can show you. If you scroll down a little bit, after you pick your state, you can see you can download the shape files right here and use them if you want to do something similar to what we have done. Now we took that data, the historical county data, and had our IT department morph it into court district boundaries because it follows the same shape as our county boundaries. And then we had them create an animation to show people how those boundaries have changed. Okay, so you notice on the upper left is the date span for a particular boundary when it began. And see as I run this, if you can watch how court district number 1 has changed places throughout the years. The metadata that comes with these shape files are really great too. You can see from all these changes how difficult it would be for a researcher to understand this without having some kind of visual tool to help them. It'll just be another couple seconds before we're done with all the changes. Here we are. Okay. So in order to describe the situation to researchers and help them make use of this data in a visual way, we thought that we could use a story map to explain how Utah has changed over the years, basically. And here is our story map. It's gonna take a minute for the shape to come up. There you go. So in the beginning, in 1850, the pioneers who settled the Utah area decided to create the state of Deseret. And this is the shape that they came up with. So it goes into Oregon and Nevada and Colorado and all the way down to San Diego. However, this shape was not approved by the US Congress. There are records associated with this particular shape, the state of Deseret, and you could click on this link to go to another repository's collection.
Elizabeth, you might have to take control back of the screen.
I'm not sure. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Now this is the shape of the Utah Territory that actually was approved by the US Congress. And we do have records going back that far. So if you wanted to know what happened in this area or this area, you could come to Utah and find out. And now we're starting to see the county boundaries as they began to be created. Now with the interaction of the story map, you can click on a particular location and it will bring up metadata about that location. And for some areas, there are several you can scroll through. Individually, counties do tell interesting stories. We do have records for this part of Nevada from Carson County. So does the Nevada State Library and Archives. And from the story map, you can link to both of them. Another county that changed names and boundaries over time. These are our court districts, the current court districts. There's a link to our early older chart. Now, if you want to look at Beaver County records from back in the day, remember that this is what the boundary looked like in Beaver County between 1856 and 1897. I'm gonna skip down a little bit. We have city records. In this case, Spring City is highlighted here. Okay, this is interesting because this is a boundary of a school district. This is the school district boundary as it existed in 2020. And then we also have the school district as that same district as it existed in 2009. And you can see the difference in the shape between the two districts. As I go back up, you can see the current one and then the earlier one. So this impacts researchers knowing where a school was located and what district it was in at the moment that they wanted to see the records, because it might be in a different district than it is now. So in finding records in the archives, it helps to know how the boundaries changed over time. All right, so we posted this story map in 2020 and it has received about 1,000 hits since then. But we're not sure if it has helped improve research requests. It's possible, but nobody has actually said so. So we hope that it's been helpful to people. And as I said, we have links to other archives where it's relevant to the story that we're telling. We have links to our own digital collections, so you can see pretty pictures. And importantly, it's also linking to geospatial records from our own holdings. The school district story map or the school district boundary, the 2009 version of that came from our electronic records holdings. So that helps explain why older electronic records help tell a story and help tell what happened with Utah. And it can help us in explaining why preserving these records are important, because geospatial records in particular are prone to just be replaced. So you always show the current version online where you can download it and use it, instead of showing the whole historical story of what happened with that space over time. There's one thing about maps which are wonderful in that they are very visual, and you can bring in photos and resources, and people have a personal connection with points on a map. It's where they grew up, it's where their grandmother grew up, it's where they went to school, all those things. Because they have a personal interest in it, you can kind of harness that interest to help shape advocacy for preservation of electronic records, because then they have some interest in making sure that it does get preserved. When electronic records help tell the story, they become immediately more valuable to the cause. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brett, Lori, and Elizabeth, for that information. Wow. It really shows in what a variety of ways and how effective maps can be for reaching audiences, new audiences in new ways with new information. If you have questions, please do enter them into the chat box. Again, you can open up the chat box by clicking on that little word bubble. While we're waiting for people to type in, Elizabeth, you mentioned the shape files. I suppose those take specialized GIS software to work with?
They do. They're an open forum, so you can use multiple types of software that understands what a shapefile is. It's not just one vendor, but it was created by SERI, I believe, as a data form.
Of course, I thought Lori's argument was made very effectively with the map, but I think you're preaching to the choir here when you're talking about the speed of change and our need for support.
Yes, I know that I am. I've spent so many years and hours with archivists, and I understand the problems acutely. And I'm a big cheerleader for resources for public sector records and archives. And yeah, I think it's true that you all know what needs to be done, but there are a lot of people who don't connect the dots in the same way. And so motivating people upstream, I think, is part of the value that I see that StoryMaps can bring.
Yeah, I think it's obvious. StoryMaps give such a visible visual, and we can translate it into concepts that are easy to understand. Oh, we do have a question here from Lauren McCoy. She's also asking about what platforms you use for these. Are they all Esri ArcGIS?
I believe the StoryMap phenomenon is specifically an Esri product. So we have ArcGIS online, and one of the features it allows us to utilize is the StoryMap option, where it provides the base map of anywhere in the world, and then you can place your own shapes on top of it and tell your own story however you like.
The real advantage is, all sorts of governmental jurisdictions have spatial mapping systems. And so, right, I mean, story maps have been used for a long time. I think you will find them often referred to in teaching children, engaging children. So I'm using it as an adult sort of learning, but yeah, Esri took the story map name and applied it to their product. So it should be out there for everybody in government to grab a hold of, I would hope. And most of them use Esri products. Pretty powerful stuff.
Brett, did Oregon also use Esri?
To my knowledge, we're operating through ArcGIS. So if I don't know Esri specifically as a unit, but if they're connected to ArcGIS, then yes.
Yeah, Esri is the parent company for that tool.
Perfect. Then yeah, that's what we've been doing too.
It was interesting to hear how the pandemic had an effect. In Oregon, and helped to come up with the idea of we need a different way to reach people. But it also really plays into how do we reach people that have challenges for getting access to places.
Yeah. The role of StoryMap as an equity enhancer was something that we hadn't really thought about until it was kind of in the works. And this was all especially after, like I said, because of COVID. We had actually done a physical exhibit on the centennial of the 19th Amendment, the amendment that secured women's suffrage in the U.S. As a physical exhibit we'd planned it in 19, executed it in the first half of 2020, and then no one saw it. Nobody came into the building. So we didn't really know what would happen timeline wise. We had no idea how or if we would ever open again. So what began as a means for us to reach anybody turned into a way for us to reach everybody, and that was pretty cool, I thought.
Yes, I think with the pandemic, a lot of archives learned really quick how do we provide a product when people can't come into the building.
Yeah, in a big way. And to the credit of the rest of my team too, the folks that have been working the actual pulling records and serving the public have been doing an incredible job remotely for almost 2 years now at this point. So it was a big change, but you know, we're actually finding that we're running a bit more efficiently now than we were before. So it's been a boon in some regards.
Yes, I know what you mean. For a while, we were appointment only, and in Maryland. Unfortunately, we don't have to do that anymore. But we found appointments work pretty well. That we can find out what you need before you get here.
Yeah, it's great for us, you know, and that means that we don't need to have as many folks on the desk as either. If we don't have um, just folks just coming in, you know, randomly, we can let our archivists devote more time to processing and to other things. I used to work on the desk a little bit more, and it's been great to be able to have my role change into more of a public education one, since I'm not as needed out there. So it's been pretty cool, all things considered. You know, I mean, the situation is terrible, but the
Right.
outcome has
There's
been...
a silver lining, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Other questions for our speakers? Well, thank you again for all three of you. I mean, that was really interesting. On our next slide here, we have some ways that you can stay connected and informed. We'll have more SERI webinars coming your way. Please stay tuned. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And before you go, don't forget, if you have ideas of topics you'd like to see in webinars or trainings, drop them in the chat box for us.
Thank you much, y'all.